We should probably do some sort of introduction. Like, hi, everybody. I'm Patricia.
I'm Lee.
And we're weird as fuck.
Yeah, I suppose you probably should, I guess, huh?
Yeah. Because someday we might be famous. Okay. So. Are we ready?
We're ready.
Are you ready for September's list of glitches in the Matrix?
Sure.
All right. So once again, I've combed the internet for some of my favorite stories. I am hopeful that some of our dear listeners will start sending us some of their stories because I'd like to hear them. A lot. Actually, I'd like to hear them a lot. But I do have a few from the interwebs and a few from some friends. I'm going to start off with a friend of mine, Lisa, is a housekeeper in the Gorge. All right. So Lisa sent me a synopsis of her story. She said I could use it on the air. And essentially, she's a housekeeper at one of the popular hotels in the Gorge. And she went in and cleaned a room after a guest had stayed there. He had left, checked out. She verified the checkout as they're supposed to do before they go in. She cleaned the room and she left. She remembered the room number was 312 because she and I had just been talking about the Hotel Paranormal episode where we had noticed that like every haunted room was 312.
Or 313.
Yeah, 312, 313, 311. It was just weird.
Strange.
So she said she had noticed it for that reason. So she cleaned room 312. She went a couple rooms down and cleaned there. And then when she was walking back along the hallway, the door to 312 was open and the gentleman's luggage was in the room. The same guy. She said she remembered him because he was a distinctive, very tall African-American gentleman, very friendly, real nice guy. And she said it looked like he'd never left. And she knew she had just cleaned that room.
That would piss me off more than anything.
Yeah, she was a little bit annoyed. But she asked him, oh, you came back. And he's like, no, I just got up. What are you talking about? So that was her little glitch in the Matrix.
That would be weird.
She cleaned a room that apparently she never cleaned, that apparently someone was sleeping in. So
weird as fuck.
Yeah. Can you imagine? That would just be annoying. I've had days at work where it felt like I was spinning my wheels and working my ass off and accomplishing absolutely nothing. But to actually experience working your ass off and accomplishing absolutely nothing.
That would suck.
That would piss me off.
I haven't ever had anything glitchy like that.
But we have.
I can remember.
We have, but we've sort of chalked it up to potentially paranormal activity.
Oh, thinking it's ghost, yeah.
So is it a glitch in the Matrix? Is it a ghost? I think there's a fine line on some of these stories. Is it paranormal or is it something else?
Oh, we definitely have something like that because I had a nice game camera locked in a filing cabinet disappear.
We will share that story in its entirety when we talk about ghosties in Washington
I think
State.
it's ghosties because I put the game camera downstairs to see if I could see ghosts.
See, you're ruining the story for future listeners.
Yeah. Sorry. We'll go over it later.
We'll go over it later. In fact, I want to do a series about ghost stories from every state because there's some weird stuff out there.
Yeah, some weird ass shit, yeah.
And, beyond our, whenever I leave you alone, leave you to sleep alone, something shakes the bed.
Well, you just said not to say anything.
Well, no, we're not telling the game camera story because that's my favorite story, and we'll save that one for the episode. But we've got a lot of stories.
Yeah, we've got a lot of stories in this house. There's a lot of weird shit out there. Especially when you had the daycare. Boy, there's all kinds of shit going on.
Our ghost would lock itself in the bathroom. I felt bad.
And then scare the shit out of the kids. Yeah.
It was interesting that they spent, 12 years. Every class of kids that I'd have come in would describe the same guy in the bathroom.
Yep.
And he didn't want them in there. He's just like, fuck you, go away. Clearly, the guy didn't like kids. But we're not talking about our haunted house today.
No, we're talking about we got a little off subject.
We got a little off subject. Today we're talking about glitches in the Matrix because I know you really like these stories. So this one I thought was really cool. This lady, and some of these I actually do have some names this time. I did pull these off of websites and, from friends' accounts. This one is, the user's name is Watermelly3, and this came from Reddit. And she says, about 2 years ago, I went to collect my husband from the ferry after work. My husband got into the car, and as I was driving very slowly out of the car park, we both noticed two people standing a few meters in front of our car. It looked as though they were strangers, older-looking professionals, both walking to their separate vehicles in different areas of the car park. The man was reaching into his side bag, and the lady was further ahead of him, with her head turned to the right. I know the exact positions they were in because they were completely frozen on the spot. My husband and I sat there watching the frozen strangers, not saying anything to each other, and then, all of a sudden, it was like someone pressed play, and they just started moving like nothing had happened. My husband and I promised each other we would never forget how weird the experience was. I can't remember exactly how long they stayed frozen like that, but it was long enough to freak us both out.
Yeah, that'd be weird, but it could also be something planned. They're just fucking with people.
Well, yeah, and that's totally something you and I would do. But I think that maybe that's why she mentions that it appeared that they were strangers. Because, you don't get off the ferry and say, hey, let's fuck with the next car that comes out. I would. This guy, his story was kind of interesting. This also came from Reddit. He said, this is probably going to get buried, but I met someone who no longer seems to exist. And he doesn't mean died, but somebody who just doesn't exist. In October 2018, I developed tendonitis in my hand, so I went to see a hand specialist at my regular hospital. You can tell that these aren't American stories because we don't go unless our hands have fallen off because our medical system sucks. In other developing countries, you can actually go see the doctor when you get sick. That's the end of my political rant for today. I remember the hand specialist really clearly. She was a really happy, talkative Vietnamese woman with straight, dark brown hair and glasses. She had a German-sounding last name, which I assumed must be her married name. She was really nice, and we had a long conversation about a medical conference that she goes to. She explained that my hand issues, caused by phone usage, were the hot topic of the conference, and that she'd probably use my injury as an example when she got there. Anyway, she gave me care instructions and sent me home. I was told to return if it didn't resolve in a few weeks because by then I'd need to be re-examined and sent to physical therapy. It didn't resolve, and so I went back. I had an appointment with the same doctor, but the woman who came into the room was completely different. She was a white woman with light brown hair, no glasses, completely different face shape, really dull, and very unwelcoming. I was so fucking confused. I asked her name, and she gave me the same name that the Asian doctor had. I asked if there was another doctor by that name, and she told me no, it was only her. I described the doctor I'd seen, and she got annoyed and said she didn't know what I was talking about. I went online to the hospital staff directory and tried to find the Asian doctor, but couldn't. I've no idea what happened to her. I even checked my medical records to see if maybe I remembered her name incorrectly, but I didn't. Both of my visits have the same doctor's name on them. I've always been confused about this, and it really bothers me that I met someone who doesn't seem to exist anymore. That one comes from Depressed Hermit 1. So either somebody was pretending to be somebody they weren't, which you would think, for as long as he was in there for the consultation for the doctor, that somebody would have come into the room. Maybe the doctor, unless they were really, really, really behind. Or it was a nurse or a PA, and the doctor was taking credit for their work, which isn't uncommon.
No, a lot of people fake being doctors too.
Yeah. Or the Matrix rewrote this doctor.
Yeah.
So this comes from Reddit as well. I spent a lot of time on Reddit this month. a lot of time. So this is, the Redditor's name is The Names Clove.
Weird.
The Names Clove. I don't know. Whatever. So I vividly remember this girl at my school perishing after she drove over the side of an exit ramp that was having construction done on it. The reason she didn't realize that work was being done on it, sorry, tripped up that way, was because she was texting while she was driving. I remember my sister and her friends going to the funeral. She was in my sister's grade. We lived in a small town, and I remember everybody talking about it for weeks. Fast forward almost 10 years, I've told my fiance the story enough times that she knows the girl's name by heart, mainly to try to convince her not to text while she's driving. My fiance is from the other side of the country, and I never go back to my hometown, so she doesn't know any of the people I went to high school with personally. One day, she's looking at my sister's Facebook page and said, "Hey, isn't that the dead girl?" I came over to check it out, and it turns out she's alive, married to an old friend of mine, and has a child. No one remembers the car accident or funeral. I'm so confused.
That would be weird.
Yeah, that would be really weird.
But there's always lots of weird stories around. All right, back to the story.
This one didn't have a name associated with it. It says, when we were all teenagers, we had a cool shed at a friend's house that we'd hang out in every weekend. It had 4 sets of bunk beds, tables, a fireplace, TV, fridge, etc. Sounds like a cool hangout to me.
Yeah.
One night, we were all hanging out in there when I decided to go out and take a pee. I walked out the front door of the shed and started to walk to the right when I stopped. Now let me explain the layout here. As you walk out of the shed, his house is to the left, and to the right is where we all parked our cars. Further out, you're left with empty fields and trees. And you can tell this is probably a dude because most girls wouldn't have walked very far from the building to pee. There's a lot logistically involved in us peeing outside. It was dark by now. The lights from the house were illuminating the space between the house and the cars, but trailing off just past them. As I took a step to the right, intending to go behind the cars to relieve myself, I saw my friend's older brother standing there. I watched him for a good 5 to 10 seconds as he stood there, facing into the darkness. He then proceeded to walk behind a couple trees and a car before he disappeared. Confused, I walked back into the shed and asked my friend what his brother was doing by the cars. The conversation went as follows. "Hey man, what's your brother doing by the cars?" "What do you mean?" "He just walked off behind the cars." The brother comes up. "I'm standing right here in the shed."
Yeah.
I looked over and there he was, sitting down on one of the chairs with a drink. He was wearing the exact same clothes as I saw him in, and the only way to get into the shed was through the door I was standing in the way of. To this day, I've no idea how it all happened. I'm guessing I was just seeing things, but the fact that I watched him walk around for a good 10 seconds has always puzzled me. I've never had anything else like that happen.
That's definitely weird.
That would be very strange. And I've heard stories about that by location, where people have claimed to see somebody in 2 places at once. Apparently Jesus was good at it. And also high school kids drinking in the middle of the night. It's difficult to say. All right. This next one comes from... I've lost my note. Someplace other than Reddit. I know this one didn't come from Reddit. And I'm very sorry that I don't know who you are because I took poor notes. This one says, I was a sophomore in high school at my girlfriend's house watching a movie. It was around 10 p.m. when the flick ended. I proceeded to skateboard home. I only lived like 2 blocks away, and it was a pretty quiet suburban neighborhood. I'm skating down the hill towards a larger street, larger but never really busy, especially not at night, when I reached the intersection and hit a rock. I had planned on blasting across the street since there were no cars coming from either direction. I fly off the board, skid a good 3 or 4 feet on my head, right shoulder, hip, and knee. I rolled to my back and screamed out in agony. The pain was so bad I couldn't really move. I look up the road, and about 30 yards off is a car coming straight down the road at me, right where I was laying. I was right in its path. It was a 2-lane street. I was right in the middle of the lane. My head was aligned with the wheel. I tried like hell to move. I screamed. I yelled. I couldn't do anything. The car was about 15 yards off. He couldn't see me. He made no attempt to swerve. Then 10 yards. I hear him barreling down. I closed my eyes, braced for impact. Nothing happened. When I opened my eyes and looked where the car had been, there was nothing there. I heard the car behind me and turned to see it driving down the road past me, taillights cruising up the road. I hadn't moved, and he hadn't swerved. It was like he passed right through me, or I passed through him. There isn't any real way he could have passed over me, not the way I had landed and positioned in the street. It was a little car. I can't explain it. I got up, terrified, bloody, and baffled. I hobbled home and went to sleep. No one believed me, but it's true. So this one also came from Reddit, Glitch in the Matrix. And I love that his name is You're a Moron, but he spelled you're wrong. So the irony. It's beautiful. All right. So I was catching a train in one particular city about 15 minutes from where I get off. While I was waiting, there's a woman with glazed eyes asking people for money. She came up to me, stopped briefly, and said, "Excuse me, could you spare some money? My brother's in the hospital, and I'd like some money to buy him flowers." That's rich, I thought. Drug addicts are getting more and more obvious with their lies. "Here's $5. I gave it to her without even looking her in the face. I was convinced that her intentions were bad. Anyway, my train pulls up and I get on. I look through the glass at her, walking around asking other people for money as the train was pulling away. The train arrived at the station 15 minutes later, and I walked down and out onto the bus stop. There's only one bus the direction I'm going, and it's just my luck. It's waiting there when I get off the train. So on the bus I hop and wait for the bus driver to finish reading his paper before the doors close, and we embark down the highway. 5 to 10 minutes of travel later, the driver pulls over for a routine stop. The doors open, and to my complete astonishment, the woman from the train walks into the bus with a dozen roses in hand. She looks me right in the eye as she walks past to take her seat. How the blue hell did she get there? I took the train before her. I watched her at the train stop from inside when we pulled away. I went over a river. I caught the first and only bus going in this direction. And not only did she beat me there, but she also had time to go to a store and buy roses. To this day, I have no idea how this happened.
Yeah, I don't know.
Well, he says that he gave her the money without even really looking at her.
Yeah.
So maybe it wasn't her that got on with flowers.
Maybe
it was somebody else.
Yeah, that one I don't know.
I thought it was interesting.
Bullshitty.
I thought it was interesting. I've definitely had days where everywhere I went, it seemed like I was running into the same people. But, that one, I thought that was interesting, but not the most convincing one. This one was kind of cool. This guy was monkeying around on the handrails of the balcony on the 4th floor of his building when he fell off. 4 floors is what? About 43 feet?
Yeah, you're going to be dead.
Yeah. His buddies were watching in horror. He remembers seeing the concrete floor coming up at him as he landed head first and thinking, "Oh no, I'm going to break my wrists." Why I was just thinking of my wrists, I don't know.
Yes. Your head and your neck would be a little more worse.
Watermelon. The next thing I remember is seeing my buddies yelling from up there, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" I looked up and said, "What happened?" They didn't actually see me hit the floor. They just ran outside and saw me already standing there looking up at them. Not a scratch, not a bruise, nothing hurt. I don't remember hitting the ground, standing up, nothing. No memories exist for those 1 or 2 seconds. None of us 3 ever understood what happened, but we all saw it and we all agreed on what happened.
That one's weird as fuck.
I thought that one was pretty weird. Little palate cleanser after the not so weird one of the homeless lady at the train station.
Yes. I feel refreshed.
This one I thought was kind of cool. So, you feel refreshed?
Cleanse your palate. It was delicious.
Oh, God. Okay. One day, I was walking to work, and all of a sudden, I had an urge to walk a different path than usual. I work downtown in a big city. It was a strange, spur-of-the-moment urge to walk a different way that had changed my life forever. I turned into an alley that I had never seen before. As I remember it, I made it about 15 feet or so when an actual glitch happened. Everything in my mind just scrambled. I felt like I didn't have a body anymore, just that I was semi-conscious, floating through some weird dimension. All of a sudden, in the array of different colors and shapes, a vision came to me. It was a bunch of strange-looking people that in my mind resembled businessmen in suits. They looked startled and panicked that I could see them. One of the people made a quick movement and everything turned black. When I regained normality, I was on a completely different street. It was the same street that I always used to walk to work. I felt sick and severely disturbed and depressed. I've never done any hard drugs, never experienced hallucinations, never have had anything like this happen to me. The weird thing, when the glitch was correcting itself and I could see those people watching me like a caged animal, I had the feeling that I knew I was being controlled. It still bothers me very much to this day.
Yeah, that one's strange.
That one was weird. And that was also from Reddit, Glitch in the Matrix. And his username is a lot of italics.
I just wonder why anybody would go to all this trouble to make something like this just to watch. But I guess there's a lot of bored people out there.
Well, there's a lot of theories. There are as many theories, I think, as there are people who have theories about the glitch in the Matrix. Everybody's just a little bit different. But a lot of people think, and I agree, that if you're trying to study human behavior, that it's a very useful way to do it unobserved. In any clinical setting, if you're trying to study how people interact with one another and they know you're there, they're going to alter their behavior.
Yeah.
But by creating a simulation and programming it, I don't know how you would program it randomly to behave in a random fashion, but I'm not a programmer. I don't know. But if you had the capacity to do that, then you could watch humans evolve. You could watch societies rise and fall. You could see how certain societies behave when subjected to certain stimuli. I mean, think about the world we live in right now. It's like there's a toddler sitting at a keyboard randomly hitting keys.
Well, right now I could see how they do it because it's a total shit show and there's lots of stuff to watch.
I want to know what happened to the fucking murder hornets. Honestly, they were a big deal and now we never hear about them. Did they just scrap that particular piece of code? Are they coming back later?
Or it's always really super great news at first, and then they just kind of shove it under the carpet and don't talk about it anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we're in a season of my favorite program, and they just decided that the storyline wasn't going anywhere, so they'd rewrite it.
Yeah.
It's like
a lot of weird shit going on right now.
2020 is a shitstorm of epic proportions.
Yep.
And there are businessmen in suits who are frantically pushing buttons to see what happens next. So, I mean, I can understand it, I suppose, from that perspective. If you're trying to understand how human beings would behave under pressure, what better way to do it? Yeah, that's my phone and it's buried somewhere. I don't know where it went. It's in here.
You tell me to silence my phone.
I thought I had. Sorry. All right. You ready for another one? I got one more.
Okay.
So this one I thought was really weird because it's really subtle. And I think that there have been several times in my lives when my lives, I don't know, maybe there have been more than one life. We'll cover reincarnation later. But there have been several times in my life that things just seemed a little off. Not where you could really put a finger on this is where it went wrong or this is what went wrong, but things were just wrong. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Well, this guy says, I had a conversation with an old workmate who described much the same thing. The detail is hazy, but he said that one day he was in his house when he felt a sudden need to go outside and stand on the lawn. He claimed it was the strongest, clearest feeling he'd ever had, and in doing so, he experienced a sort of wobble. He just said everything was screwed up for a moment, and he experienced a feeling of detachment, outsidedness. When it passed, he turned around and went back inside. Now, while talking to me, he got quite upset at this point, and he asked me not to think he's crazy. But he said the next thing he saw was his car parked in the street. It was the same model and registration, but it was the wrong color. He was so thrown off by this, And then more so because when his wife came out to ask what he was doing, he said he realized she was in all appearances his wife, but somehow not his wife. He said from that point on, she liked foods she'd claimed to hate before. Sometimes she brought up memories that he had zero recollection of and talked about things that he had no relation to from their past. He said things like his route to work were still the same, but somehow different. He said there were buildings on the way that he'd missed in the 6 years he'd driven past them 5 days a week, or they just appeared overnight. He even said some people he remembered from other departments at work had just vanished, and asking about them brought total incomprehension from other people. He was a totally regular, healthy guy, but he said he measured his life in relation to that afternoon. There were things that happened before the change, and then everything afterward. He went to say that he was now living his life with a feeling that about 15% of it had spontaneously changed in one afternoon. We moved on and drifted apart since then. We have different jobs now, but I've never really felt so sure about the permanence of reality since I talked to him. So imagine he walked out onto his lawn and something somewhere reset his life.
Yeah, that would be weird as fuck, that's for sure.
For sure. So, I mean, has that ever happened to you? Where I know we've talked a few times and you said you'd had absolutely no recollection of something that we talked about. And I knew it clear as day that we had.
Yeah, but I don't know. I have such a shitty memory sometimes that I just slough it off or something like that.
Yeah. And I think that to a certain degree, I mean, we live really busy lives and sometimes we don't get enough sleep, and stress can certainly impact your memory. But I know that I've been places that I was absolutely certain should be one way and they were another way. Not dramatically, but just slightly off.
Yeah, you pay more attention than I do.
Well, it depends.
A lot of shit. I don't remember shit.
Well, it really depends on what the situation was. But I mean, there have been times when I've gone into town where I've been down the same road 100 times. I know what it looks like. I know it's there. And then suddenly there's something new there. It happened to me just a couple of weeks ago. I drove down by your mom's house, which for our dear listeners is about 2 miles from where we live. So it's a road that I've traveled literally hundreds of times. And suddenly there was a housing development that I don't remember being there. And I know I don't get out much, but still, I mean, you'd think I've gotten out enough that I would have noticed construction.
I don't know. I've seen stuff that if I haven't been down the road in a long time, that they literally built shit all in months.
Yeah, but this place even had mature landscaping, so it's not as though it was something that had just gone up.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. I chalk most of those things up to my faulty memory, but sometimes I see things and I hear things and I wonder, is it me? Is it just my Swiss cheese brain, or is it that there's something else going on?
Fucking with you. See what I'll have.
There's a toddler at the keyboard, I'm telling you.
Or somebody just had a big old doob and said, hey, let's do this shit, man.
A big old
Let's
doob.
fuck with this guy.
So, in your mind, it's not businessmen in suits, it's not aliens, it's not computer programmers, it's weed smoking college students.
No, weed smoking rich people that just have nothing else to do.
Well, imagine if simulation theory is correct, that we are part of a simulation created by a decimated population. What if we're not just a science experiment? What if we're the product of a sad mind seeking companionship?
Maybe.
Dude, do better. You can do better than this.
You do improve. 2020 is getting really fucked up.
Yeah. Did you hear that there's a meteor that's supposed to that could potentially hit the earth on election day.
Yeah. Probably will with the way it's been fucking going around here.
I'm just wondering which way they're going to spin it. Which candidate is going to say, God has spoken, you didn't elect me, and this is your punishment. And the other one's going to say, this is the confirmation you needed. God wants me.
Who knows?
So we've destroyed Rhode Island. I don't know. I don't know where it's landing, but yeah. Right, better code. But anyway, those are my Glitch in the Matrix stories for September. What do you think?
Pretty good.
I thought Lisa's was the most interesting, but
yeah, that's definitely some weird shit going on.
Because I mean, she's a pretty level-headed person, and she said this was a very distinctive customer, and she knew he checked out.
Yeah, that's pretty weird.
Yeah, so there we go. If you have Glitch in the Matrix stories, or really any story that you would like to share with our listeners, please wander over to www.weirdasfck.com and leave us a message in our contact form. We'd love to hear from you. Until then, we'll see you next week.
Bye.
Bye. Want to stay connected between shows? You can find us on Instagram at WeirdAsFCKPodcast, on Twitter at WeirdAsFuckPod1, on Facebook at WeirdAsFCKPodcast. Send us an email at weirdasfckkpodcast@gmail.com, or come on over to our website at www.weirdasfck.com. There you can check out our blog, pick up some merch, look over our sources, and even share your weird experiences. You might even make it on a future episode. We would love to hear from you. Until then, tune in and keep it weird.